The question I had was with the impact of machines taking decision based on data which was created when humans took those decisions. Yeah. So let me take a very mundane example that you have self-driving cars. They are being trained when all the people on the road, or most of the people on the road, are humans. Now, let's extrapolate and say suddenly, these self-driving cars come in and everyone has a Tesla and everyone is in a self-driving car. So this is a mundane example with self-driving cars, but there could be situations in other places like health, et cetera, where maybe because these machines are taking the decision, the value of the data which they're taking the decision on might not have the same impact. You see what I'm getting at?
I think I do.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah, no, so, I think, your point is well taken in the sense that if you're making use of data that in some sense is based on a very different situation and context than what you have, it's, you would obviously get suboptimal results while doing that. And then you could argue that, well, the system is going to learn as there are more self-driving cars and so forth. I would say, though, that what's likely, to also happen is the entire system changes, right? So if you have a predominance of self-driving cars, the next thing to streamline that whole equation may be, smarter roads that are communicating with the cars as they go by. Perhaps the cars are communicating with each other as well. So there's always going to be that change. And I don't think that we usually end up in a situation where, obviously for some time we might be using the data that's available, but as the new data gets available, because it's a very dynamic world that we're talking about, then that makes it just completely different in terms of the kinds of analyses that you would do. So, I think that would be the larger point that I would make, that I would expect that whole context to change.
There are a couple of things that I would add as sort of things to think about. I think it's well known that there's people messing with the self-driving cars right now. So like kids make fake stop signs and they stand in the middle of an intersection and hold them up and the self-driving cars stop, right? And a human driver would just laugh at the kid with the fake stop sign. But now we have to teach the self-driving cars to look for fake stop signs, which is a little scary because, and that's just one of many examples where the environment itself changes because the environment is changing, right? I have a nephew who is an engineer, and I had a conversation with him one time about whether or not he knew how to calculate a square root. And he said, well, I use my calculator. And I said, what if you didn't have a calculator? And he said, everything has a calculator. And I said, well, what if you're on a desert island? And he said, then why do I need a square root? We're going to always be faced with the fact that the environment changes itself, right? And I think that as long as the agents that are learning are smart enough to learn from the environment and not from what we think the environment is, we'll probably be okay. But at the same time, I think our human brains will always be a little better than our algorithmic agents. And therein lies opportunity for bad behavior. Therein lies opportunity for product evolution. Therein lies opportunity for change and all of that, right?
And I think just to comment on something you had said earlier, Anthony, in terms of, what would you tell the business leaders in terms of employees and, what they should be ready for? It's change, actually. I think it goes to that point that we just made. I think that's where intrinsically, humans could be one step ahead of what's happening, because as the environment changes and so forth, they're devising, different approaches to that. And I think it just becomes something that has to become part of our DNA, rather than just staying on these stable situations, but it's going to be a much more dynamic and changing situation. And I like to describe my job as just two words: change agent. And I think that's pretty much the way it's going to become for every job, really.